Welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. Aaron, you're up this week.
Yes.
What are you bringing to the table today?
Well, as you know, Damien.
Yes.
And dear listener, I'm bringing episode 5 of Eyes on the Prize 3, which is called We Don't See Color. And as we discussed at the end of the last week's episode, that's not correct.
Correct. Yeah.
And the episode proves that. This episode is about the efforts to resegregate our schools, both K-12 and higher education. The first half of the episode focuses on Prop 209 in California, which was called Prohibition Against Discrimination or Preferential Treatment by State and Other Public Entities, which is titled that way to make it sound like you're for something good.
Yes.
It's tricky like that. And this was passed in 1996, and you can tell from the title that, like I said, this was designed to confuse the public.
Absolutely.
And was framed as a civil rights proposition. The conservative organizations that were pushing for this also used limited quotes from Dr. King to say how he would have been against affirmative action because of that one line in the We Have a Dream speech, which is not surprising given where we are right now in 2025. But it's always wild to me to see purposeful manipulation of his teachings.
Yes.
So that was a fun moment where I just shook my head.
Yes.
And shook my fist at the screen. The second half of the episode was a little closer to home for me because I remember some of this happening live.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was about the attacks on Wake County School busing program, which was designed to create economically diverse schools, which is closely tied to other identities and other outcomes for diversity.
Right.
And this was essentially a resegregation program, and I say it was close to home because I was in graduate school at NC State in Raleigh when this was happening. And so I remember some of the news about this and some of the regular rallies that were happening and organized downtown. I remember we had some class discussions about it and the importance of the program and what it had accomplished.
Right.
But enough about me. I just remember that.
No.
There are some incredible interviews in this episode with Kimberly Crenshaw, Ted Shaw, Erica Wilson, Shanta Driver, Reverend William Barber, Reverend Nancy Petty, Dr. Timothy Tyson, and a lot of other people.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get into this. Where do you want to start?
No, I'm going to go back to you guys. I definitely, as I was watching this, was thinking, if this would have been familiar to you and if you were there in grad school at the time. So what a crazy coincidence that we got to watch this and it hit close to home for you.
Yeah, and there's always two stories in these episodes. And so I had no idea what was coming in the second half of this one because the description was a little bit more vague for this episode in terms of locations.
Right.
And so they said, now let's go to North Carolina or whatever the transition was. I said, oh, I remember this.
It's all coming back to me.
Yeah, I was going to pause it there and go to bed for the night and ended up staying up later to watch most of the rest of the episode.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a little bit more, I don't know, it gripped me differently.
Absolutely.
I remember it.
Yeah, you were there. Wow, that's awesome. But all that to say, this was a really great episode, another great episode in this docuseries. To me, there were a lot of parallels in this particular episode to where we find ourselves now.
What do you mean?
Especially given what's happening at the federal level and just across the country. I think one of the biggest parallels for me is exactly what you highlighted with the full name of Prop 209. I paused it to read it and I was like, what? It's such a confusing title, and that's the point. And it just reminded me of our conversation about the OBBBA bill, that we talked about several times here on the podcast, and how a lot of the conversations and the hearings about that bill were rushed and how some of the provisions in that bill weren't made clear to the American people. And, we now see the dangers that are coming as a result of the passage of that bill. So that was sort of one thing that stood out to me, the parallels there. The other thing I'll mention, just to add on to what you said about how conservative groups who were advocating for Prop 209 use these, cherry-picked MLK quotes in their arguments for it. And I agree. It's always so infuriating when that happens. I hate that so much. But I also just really appreciated what some of the folks interviewed in this docuseries, like Ted Shaw and Judith Brown Diana, said about the short-sightedness of Prop 209 and their arguments for it. So Ted said something to the effect of, sometimes the mind can play tricks and tell us that we've arrived at a place we haven't arrived at.
Yeah, I loved that.
Yeah, right. And then Judith said, quote, they would always bring up, we don't need it any longer. We've come so far. Yet at the same time, it just ignored the fact that housing discrimination still existed. It ignored the fact that we still had inequities in healthcare. It ignored all of the racism with this idea that actually there are a few people who have made it, and isn't that enough? And like the way she punctuated that, isn't that enough? It got me, and that to me is the whole point of this. You know, California wasn't in this post-racial utopia that Ward Connolly, who was sort of the architect that they put to run this mission to get Prop 209 passed, you know, it wasn't the post-racial utopia that they said that they were in. Affirmative action up to that point was working to right some of the wrongs of our society and our history. And there was still so much more that needed to be done. And, you know, it was cut a little short there. So, yeah, that was really all just so fascinating to learn more about with this episode.
Yeah, and I think a few people make this point in the episode that the Prop 209 and then some of the things that happened in Wake County were really predictors. They were the proverbial canaries in a coal mine that said, hey, these things that have been fought for and achieved in some way are not safe.
Yep.
They are going to be under attack pretty consistently. And I think we didn't fully recognize, broadly speaking, didn't all recognize the imminent danger that was coming.
Absolutely.
From those moments. And I think that's, you know, in hindsight is, I can say whatever.
Sure.
But I think it's just interesting to think about that and think about, okay, Prop 209 exists, and then what are the steps that get us from Prop 209 to essentially the Supreme Court revoking the Voting Rights Act?
Right.
There's a line connecting those dots.
Absolutely.
And there's a couple other stops on the way, right? So one of the things that Kimberly Crenshaw said in here that I think is really important is, I think it's really important because it challenges the foundations of the arguments of folks who are opposed to affirmative action and opposed to diversity initiatives. So Dr. Crenshaw points out that when we talk about merit, we're talking about a limited window of characteristics that add up to merit.
Right.
She says merit was defined by the white men who were basically calling the shots. And when we talk about merit, we're talking about things that are typically not accessible to everyone. And the right-wingers who want to roll back all of these integration efforts, they want to talk to us about merit this and merit that. But it's a sneaky dog whistle, I think, because it's not a dog whistle like the rest of them.
Yep.
We haven't all become attuned to the fact that it is a dog whistle.
Absolutely.
Also, dog whistles have completely changed in the last how many years?
Yeah.
But especially when we look at the University of Michigan undergraduate admissions program that was under scrutiny at the Supreme Court, this big argument about this admissions process was that minoritized people receive 20 points for their racial identity.
Right.
But Dr. Crenshaw points out that there are 28 points that people of color are unlikely to receive based on their applications. Some of those things were competitive high schools, living in rural Michigan, having a parent who is an alum. And she points out that all of these things add up to 28 points and are unlikely to be assigned to applications from people of color.
Right.
So what are we really talking about here? This is not a cut and dry advantage for people of color, these 20 points. There are many factors at play, and they were trying to take that into account. But the attack dogs for this particular program were able to point out this 20 points, and make it look like this terrible thing, terrible advantage that was going to applicants of color.
Yeah, and in reality, it was really trying to even the score a little bit, right? And you're right. I think there's absolutely a lot of factors at play. In particular, I think about it from the perspective of the work that I do. I've never worked directly in admissions and undergraduate admissions, but I've always somehow been tangentially connected to admissions and the work and the admissions processes for my entire career, and none of it is cut and dry like that. And there's a lot of work and effort and intentionality that has gone into those processes to try to make them as equitable and as fair as possible. And so I also very much so appreciated Dr. Crenshaw perspective actually throughout this entire episode, but especially about that and walking us through that as that went to the Supreme Court. And that was just another case study in this episode. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about the Wake County School Board situation. That was so fascinating for me. I hadn't heard about it before. And I talked about parallels earlier. We got to learn more about the response from the community to the students' assignments policy that I think was making a real positive difference in the lives of all students and their education and their learning in that county. And that, though, led to an election where 5 new conservative members were elected to the school board, and it became a 5-member conservative majority. And right out the gate, right at that very first school board meeting with this new conservative majority in place, they had this 9-point plan to change the leadership of the board, to abolish that student assignments policy. What else did they do? They wanted to strike the word diversity from the county's educational goals and mission. Yep. They wanted to ensure parental choice, and there were a few other things. And they added those items to the meeting agenda, and parents and community members hadn't seen them before, and the other members of the board, even the school board, hadn't even seen them before, which is obviously fundamentally wrong and sort of flies in the face of what that process should look like. And it just reminded me, so going back to the parallels, it reminded me of Project 2025 and how the Trump administration wasted no time in implementing provision after provision. Project 2025, as soon as they took office, from day one, with all of those executive orders. And of course, this is despite Trump saying that he knew nothing about Project 2025, which was obviously a lie. And, there was so much about the Wake County school board situation that was just wild and awful. But I think the biggest was the long-term impact of that particular school boards. I think their tenure is 2 years, but one of the women interviewed said, it took decades for us to right the wrongs from the work of that school board and how disruptive it was to the entire school system and to progress. And that wasn't just in Wake County, that then expanded to the state. And the state made changes and started to support charter schools and do all of these things. And again, the effect of that was felt for years to come.
Yeah, and one of the things that I want to highlight is how effective this diversity program was.
Yes.
They had students at or above grade level, 90-something% of students across the whole district.
Right.
And that included doubling, essentially, the rate of Black students who were at or above grade level across the whole district.
Yes.
So when this aw shucks conservative gets elected and says that this isn't segregation and that the school board is basically moving around bad students, so to speak, to hide them from looking bad for the school district, because this was a nationally regarded school district who had no bad schools.
Right.
And that's in air quotes.
Right. Yes.
No bad schools. But they, his point is blown out of the water because look at the rates of everybody across it. That's not counting this particular school or that particular, that's across the whole district, across the whole county. This is having huge positive impacts for everybody across the district.
Yeah, I think he referred to it as like a shell game or a numbers game, and it was like, no. the statistics are here in black and white.
Yeah, and you're pulling a shell game by trying to change the way that this is working and calling it neighborhood schools. Speaking of neighborhood schools, I want to connect back to that point in a second, because I want to talk about the moment where folks get arrested at that Wake County School Board meeting. So Reverend Barber, Reverend Petty, Dr. Tyson, and Mary Williams are all speaking at the meeting during public comment, and they make the decision to refuse to leave. I imagine they made that decision before they arrived, because they talk about it in the interviews. So Dr. Tyson starts pontificating about a lot of stuff, specifically calling the school board resegregationists, which it seems like they really hated.
Yes, and he knew they did.
Yes, and he just kept going. And it was a beautiful lecture and moment of grandstanding in favor of racial equity. And eventually Reverend Barber just says, hey, we're not leaving. This is nonviolent resistance, and we're going to sit here. And then they joined arms, and they started singing songs, and they entirely derailed the meeting. And so the school board ended up leaving. The organizers got up to sit at the board table and continue the lesson that they had started from the public comment podium. and then they get asked to leave and then ultimately get arrested. But it's such a powerful visual and powerful statement. They were there letting the school board know who they were and what they were doing and what that meant to the community and to all of the students that they knew and were advocating on behalf of.
Yes, absolutely. It was really beautiful to see that moment. Obviously, it's never fun for anyone to get arrested, but it was beautiful to see. In particular for me, it was beautiful to see Reverends Barber and Petty and Dr. Tyson and Mary Williams just kind of form that coalition together.
Yeah.
They came together, they had meetings. I think it started with Reverend Barber calling Reverend Patty in the middle of the night, and she made this beautiful comment about how when a reverend gets called in the middle of the night, you think it's something bad, and it was to start this work. And for them to stand up and fight against that school board in the way that they did, it was so inspiring. And I think there's a lot to learn from their work. And they even talk about that this was civil rights in action. And there's a lot to learn from them, which was great. It was also amazing to see how other everyday people stood up to that school board as well. It was one of the women said it was mothers and grandmothers who came together and showed up at these school board meetings and made public comments. We actually even saw some of the children in the school district, in the county, get up and make public comments as well and condemn the school board and its actions. And, it just reminded me of the power of community and the power of being in community with one another and looking out for each other.
Yeah.
And it's powerful when you get arrested for it.
Right.
As you shared. And, and also when the school board decides to make it more difficult for people to attend the meetings. That was another part of this. We saw that too.
Yeah. Or even changed the agenda like they did, and you said.
Right, they changed the agenda. They changed the meeting dates and meeting times without notice. They started to require tickets.
Yep.
to attend the meetings, which is just so crazy. And, it just reminded me of, as I was sitting and watching it, I was thinking about, wow, like what's the right side of history here? And if you're trying to hold these meetings in the dark, you're trying to keep people away from your public school board meetings, that isn't the right side of history that I think anyone really wants to or should be on.
Yes. And further proves that they are resegregationists.
There it is.
Which, to bring it back, neighborhood schools is a term that was coined by George Wallace.
Yes.
None other than George Wallace, Mr. I'm going to stand in the door of this school to stop any black children from entering it.
Absolutely.
That man coined the term neighborhood schools. So we can see the direct line from him to school choice, to neighborhood schools, and all of the ideological maneuvering in between.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, let's talk about application. How does this episode apply to our day-to-day lives and work? I want to bring this quotation from the end of the episode from Reverend Barber.
Oh, good.
He says, quote, "People who are educated with a commitment for justice, oppressors see them as dangerous. And we should never forget that. And so we're going to fight on every plane. We're going to fight at the ballot box. We're going to fight in the public sphere. We're going to fight at the board meeting. What we're not going to do is retreat. We're going to fight all the way." So that's my application, because that's what it is. And I think we can see that today, where we're watching as a through line from this Wake County mess from 2009 to 2011 and beyond, and what conservatives have been doing to local school boards with Moms for Liberty recently. All of this attack on public education is in service of this. It's in service of the fear that they have of people being dedicated to one another and committed to justice and being educated enough to understand it all.
That part, absolutely. I'm pointing at Aaron in his face. No, I loved the way that this episode closed with Reverend Barber's beautiful words. He also, in his words there, talked about and highlighted the impact of segregation and how it's impacted all of us, but it's also impacted our democracy and on our collective sense of what justice is and should look like in this society. And so I agree. Reverend Barber's words there to close this episode were some of the best application from all of this. I actually wanted to share some of what Reverend Petty talked about in one of her interviews. She shared that she wrote an op-ed about what was happening with or in Wake County's schools. And so in that op-ed, she said, quote, "We must not fool ourselves by thinking that the issues at hand are not issues of race, economic status, privilege, and power. These are the issues at stake. And then a little later on, she says, quote, "This is a moment in our history in Wake County when people from all walks of life must stand up and speak out. Anything less diminishes the value of every single human being living in Wake County."
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that idea of the possible diminishment of the value of human life is just so profound. And it doesn't just apply to the circumstances there at the time in Wake County, North Carolina.
No, not at all.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved her.
Yeah, she was great.
Yeah, I loved her reading of that.
Yeah,
of
she
the
got emotional
op-ed
in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was great.
And that was also what led Reverend Barber to contact her, was that op-ed.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's talk about homework. What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today? We've got one episode left in this series, and we should definitely watch it because it's about President Obama's election and the police violence and Black Lives Matter movement that came in the wake of that rise in police violence and vigilante violence. And so, that's the obvious homework, I think. Mm-hmm. But I also want to learn a little bit more about Wake County schools and what their diversity programs look like now and see how much they've been able to undo the mess that these chuckleheads created in 2009 to 2011, I think, when they were unelected. When they voted out.
They were voted out. Yeah, I agree all around. I would love to learn more about what the Wake County school system looks like now, too. So that would be great. I also want to learn more about the ripple effect of Prop 209 across the country as well. They briefly highlight, before they transition to then Michigan and then North Carolina, how Ward Connolly and his campaign, how all of that unfolded in like 6 or 7 other states outside of California. They took the show on the road. And so I kind of wanted to see what came of that as well.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that sounds good. Well, that's it for our conversations today about this episode of Eyes on the Prize 3. We do see color here on Interdependent Study, but the title of the episode is We Don't See Color.
Yes.
And Damien, you're up next time. What are you bringing to the table in our next episode?
Well, you alluded to it with your homework, and I just have I watched this episode today, and so it's just like fresh in my mind, and I loved it, and I want us to finish this docuseries, so we should just do it. So I'm going to keep the train going, the party going, and I'm going to bring the final episode of Eyes on the Prize 3 for us to talk about next week. That episode is called What Comes After Hope, and it focuses on the years 2008 to 2015. And you gave a great description there. The formal description is, quote, "It chronicles the years of America's first Black president when, despite hope for significant societal change, police brutality soared and a new movement under the banner #Black Lives Matter emerged." Yeah, I'm excited for us to finish this thing, and certainly that those years are really present in our minds. A lot happened there, so I'm excited to chat about it next week.
Yeah, me too. Great. We'll wrap this thing up.
Absolutely.
Finish strong with Eyes on the Prize 3. All right, sounds good. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube. Sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. We'll talk to you next week.